Ever think you've got it all figured out? That you're a totally rational, logical person? Well, get ready for a reality check. Today, we're diving into the big ideas from David McCraney's fantastic book, You Are Not So Smart, and it's all about how our own minds play tricks on us. Let's get right into it.
So here's the core idea of the book, and honestly, it's a bombshell. The misconception is that we're these logical beings, seeing the world perfectly clearly. But the truth? We're all pretty deluded. And the wildest part is that, according to the book, these little delusions are actually what keep us functioning.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. Think about it. Who hasn't done this stuff? These aren't just random brain farts. They're little windows, clues that show us a deeper truth about how our minds really operate. We all have these little mental glitches.
So, what if we're not as in charge as we feel? What if these everyday slip-ups are actually pointing to all the secret shortcuts and hidden biases our brains are using constantly, right under our noses?
First up, let's talk about the invisible strings that can pull our actions. It's a wild phenomenon where tiny, subtle cues in our environment can totally change how we act, all without us having a clue that it's happening. It's called priming.
So, what exactly is priming? Well, put simply, it's when being exposed to one thing, a word, an image, even a smell, can actually influence how you respond to something else later on. And it all happens unconsciously, without you ever deciding for it to happen. To really see how this works, you've got to hear about this classic study from 1996. Researchers had a group of students unscramble some sentences. Now, half the students got sentences sprinkled with polite words, like courteous. The other half got sentences with rude words like brazen. Seems innocent enough, but the real experiment was what came next. So, after they finished the word puzzle, each student had to go talk to the researcher, who was pretending to be in a deep conversation. The real test was this. Did the words they just saw change how patient they were? How long do you think each group waited before they finally interrupted?
Get this. The group that was primed with all those polite words, they waited an average of 9.3 minutes. In fact, a whopping 80% of them didn't interrupt at all in the whole 10-minute waiting period.
And the rude word group, they lasted less than half that time. On average, they jumped in after just 5.4 minutes. But here's the real kicker. When they were asked about it later, not one person believed the words they'd unscrambled had anything to do with how they behaved.
And this rabbit hole goes way deeper. Other studies are just as mind-blowing. Students primed with words related to old age literally started walking slower down the hallway. In another one, just the faint smell of cleaning supplies made people 3 times tidier. Even just seeing a sports drink without taking a sip was enough to boost physical endurance. It's like our subconscious is always listening.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that a huge chunk of your behavior, your decisions, is being guided by this adaptive unconscious. It's like you have this invisible co-pilot that you can't talk to, but it's constantly at the controls, responding to the world and steering your actions.
Okay, so if external cues are pulling our strings, what's happening on the inside? Well, it turns out one of the most unreliable narrators you'll ever meet might just be the voice inside your own head. Our brains are natural-born storytellers, and they absolutely love to invent narratives to make sense of everything.
There's a name for this. It's called confabulation. It's your mind's knack for filling in the blanks with explanations and memories that sound totally plausible, but are actually just made up. And the craziest part? You believe these stories 100%. Now, the most stunning, undeniable proof of this comes from studying split-brain patients. These are people who, for medical reasons, like severe epilepsy, have had the connection between the left and right halves of their brain severed. And this gives scientists an incredible, direct window into how our mind constructs reality.
Here's how an experiment might go. They'll flash a word, say truck, but only to the patient's right brain. Now, the left brain is the one that handles language, so when you ask the patient what they saw, they'll say nothing, because their left brain is totally in the dark. But then, if you ask them to draw what they saw with their left hand, which is controlled by the right brain, they'll draw a truck. No problem. And then the left brain, the storyteller, will immediately invent a completely logical-sounding reason for why their hand drew a truck, with zero awareness of the real cause. But here's the thing, this isn't some flaw in the system. As the book puts it so perfectly, this storytelling is absolutely essential. We are the stories we tell ourselves. This beautiful confabulation is what creates a coherent sense of who we are. It's the glue holding our identity together.
So, we're being primed from the outside,
And we're telling ourselves stories on the inside. What else is going on? Well, to put it bluntly, our brains are kind of lazy. They're built for efficiency, so they take these little mental shortcuts called heuristics. The only problem is sometimes those shortcuts lead us way off course.
And a perfect example of this is something called the availability heuristic. This is basically our brain's rule of thumb that says, hey, if I can think of an example of this really easily, it must be super calming or really important.
The classic example is the fear of shark attacks, right? The news loves to show these terrifying, dramatic stories. That makes the image of a shark attack incredibly available in our minds. So we end up thinking the risk is huge when, in reality, you are way, way more likely to die in a car crash just driving to the beach. Our brains mistake vivid for frequent.
And this quote just nails why this shortcut is so powerful. We are not creatures of statistics. We are creatures of story. It's why one vivid, emotional story about a lottery winner feels more real and persuasive to us than the cold, hard, astronomical odds of actually winning.
Okay, so after hearing all that, it's easy to feel like we're just helpless puppets dancing on the strings of our flawed minds. But that's not the point at all. The real power here isn't trying to be perfect. It's about understanding our own imperfections. So, let's do a super quick recap. We've seen how our mind is swayed by unconscious priming. We've learned that our memories are much more like stories we write than videos we record. And we've seen how we rely on these mental shortcuts that can totally mislead us. But the most important thing to remember is, these aren't your personal flaws. This is just how the human brain is wired. And that brings us to maybe the biggest, most important message of the whole book. The first step toward real wisdom is just admitting and accepting that you are not so smart. It's that humility, that awareness of our own biases that gives us the power to start questioning ourselves and ultimately to make better, more thoughtful decisions. So think of all this as a new set of tools for your brain. And I'll leave you with this to chew on. Now that you know that your gut feelings can be nudged and that your memories might be edited stories, what's the first thing you're going to start questioning about yourself?